it is 12 o'clock, so we should get started today. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Andrea Cuellar, Associate Director of the Prentice Institute for Global Population and Economy, and I am welcoming you today to our panel on the future of education. For your information, this session is being recorded for our archives and will be posted on our YouTube channel as well. First, I would like to begin by acknowledging the territory from where we're hosting this panel today. And here. So, Oki, and welcome to the University of Lethbridge. Our university's Blackfoot name is Iniskim, meaning sacred buffalo stone. The University of Lethbridge acknowledges and deeply appreciates the Blackfoot people's connection to their traditional territory. We, as people living and benefiting from Blackfoot Confederacy territory, honor the traditions of the people who have cared for this land since time immemorial. We recognize the diverse population of Indigenous peoples who attend the University of Lethbridge and the contributions these Indigenous peoples have made in shaping and strengthening the university community in the past, in the present, and in the future. Today, we're being joined by Phil McRae, Karsten Mundel, and Alex Usher, and I am going to introduce each of them now. Dr. Phil McRae is Executive Staff Officer and Associate Coordinator, Government Research with the Alberta Teachers Association and Adjunct Professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. Dr. McRae is also Special Advisor on Artificial Intelligence in Education to the Secretary General of Education International, representing 33.5 million educators worldwide. He is an internationally recognized leader and a speaker on K-12 education, school improvement, artificial intelligence, and change in complex human systems. By combining novel research with keynote advisory and policy engagements on megatrends, societal change, and the future of education, he influences how individuals and systems are navigating the fourth industrial revolution. I should note that Phil was a speaker at the World Economic Forum in Davos just last month, and therefore extremely well positioned to share with us what is the global read on these issues today. Next, we have Dr. Karsten Mundel, Vice Provost Learning Initiatives at the University of Alberta, where he provides institutional leadership on teaching and learning innovation. An adult educator by background, he brings a deep commitment to place-based learning and to designing learning environments that are responsive to local context and community. His areas of responsibility include curriculum and pedagogy renewal, academic leadership development, learning analytics, the responsible integration of artificial intelligence in higher education, and institutional stewardship of the university's learning management system, Canvas. Karsten's work is grounded in evidence-informed practice and a commitment to indigenization and inclusive learning environments. And last, we have Alex Usher, President and founder of Higher Education Strategy Associates. He is an internationally recognized expert in various higher education fields, including student financial aid, quality measurement, rankings, and public financing. Alex is the lead author of the annual Higher Education Almanac, the State of Postsecondary Education in Canada, and the co-author of the premier statistical handbook on global tertiary education entitled World Higher Education, Institutions, Students, and Funding. His internationally read and free daily blog, One Thought to Start Your Day, has over 17,000 subscribers. By the way, I subscribed recently and highly recommend it. Alex has also served as Director of the Educational Policy Institute in Canada and as Director of Research and Program Development at the Canada Millennium Scholarship Foundation. So, welcome and thank you, Phil, Karsten, and Alex. We have a diverse audience today who are joining us to listen to your uniquely informed perspectives on the future of education. From what I can see, many, at least some in the audience, are university professors like me, probably asking themselves urgently what it means to educate and to lead in education today. This is as we find ourselves, number one, at the crossroads of artificial intelligence and other digital technologies. Also, at a moment when we see openings at our educational institutions for pedagogies that honor a diversity of knowledge systems, when we also have in Alberta an unprecedented diversity of students with diverse aspirations about what they are hoping to gain from their education, and most recently, as we are being asked to think about our role in security and defense. All of this prompting us to reflect on what keeps us accountable and relevant as educational institutions. So this panel is very timely, for sure. So we're extremely privileged to have this select group of panelists illuminate us on these fundamental questions today. The format of the panel will consist of a 15-minute presentation by each of the panelists, followed by discussion, time at which the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions. The round of presentations starts with Phil, followed by Karsten, and then Alex. So welcome, Phil. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I am going to, you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So the Blackfoot gave me the name Apapum, and Apapum means lightning. So in the next 14 minutes and 30 seconds, I'm going to take you through a fairly rapid kind of a canter of what I see as the future of education. And for St. Patrick's Day, I have the Aurora Borealis. But the sum of everything I'm going to say is that the future of education is highly relational. It's about relationships, relationships, relationships. And my work has gone K-20. So I've been a professor, I've been a director in higher education, I've run multiple campus in coordinator or leadership positions in the United Arab Emirates. I've worked in K-12 schools in Lethbridge Public, advisor to the Premier and the Minister of Education. So I'm going to talk about the future of education in a K-20 scope, because I do think that those that are entering post-secondary, I want to give a little bit of context to what I see happening there, as well as what I see going forward. So just really quickly, I see the future as three: probable, possible, and possibles. Probable, possible, and preferred. What I'm going to share with you is the probable future, right? That notion of the future having an ancient heart built in the current moment. The trajectories that I'm going to share, I think, are probable trajectories. However, there's these black swan events that can happen, possible changes none of us can foresee until after the fact. That's part of it, right? We're in a global economic shock, and that could have really wide-ranging long-term implications. And we could talk about a preferred future, but I'm going to talk about more of a probable future. I'm going to look at three things. I'm going to look at the what, the context, the so what, which is really what does this trajectory mean for the future of education in the form of curriculum, in the form of people, in the form of the future of work. And then I'm going to leave you with three things. All right, so let's start with the context. I'm going to push out 10 years, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do because we can't really see strategic foresight beyond 5 years, but let's go for it. I see this as a moment that the Roman god Janus, the moment of thresholds, transitions, this is very much a moment of change. And when I think of the future of education, that change is going to, I think, really be more impactful than we historically have seen. And I've been a critic of all of the techno hype. Like when adaptive learning systems and technology came in, I wrote in the Washington Post an article that, overnight hit several 100,000 people on the politics of personalization and, give me a break. These technologies aren't going to, change education as fast as we think. However, I do think that we're at this moment of change, socially, economically, and technologically, that we haven't experienced in several hundred years. So where that change comes from are when I did a keynote with Ambassador Dominique Barton, the former head of McKinsey, we talked about four things. Here's the slide that we talked about in 2019, this trajectory of change: the economic power shifting from west to the east to the south, technology accelerating both automation and industry disruptions, one of those industries being education, both K-12 and higher education, aging populations, but very young parts of the world. So demographic shifts and demographic movements. Post-secondary, that's the international education population. And really people looking for a new societal ideal, saying what we have as a system is broken, the cost of education, the privatization of public education, all of these are part of this broader challenge that we've seen and probably going to accelerate going forward. In the K-12 system, post-pandemic, very clearly behaviors are bigger. We see more aggression in schools and school communities than we've seen. Regulation is harder, and things just generally feel heavier. And that regulation is both children and adults in the K-12 system. I was at the World Economic Forum, as Dr. Cooler just mentioned, at the invitation of the Human Change Movement, which was really interesting given the variety of speakers and people that were there, looking at how really young people and humanity is changing in a world of social media and technology fusion. And I would say there's one word that our Prime Minister was very, very clear. Strategy, nostalgia is not a strategy, and we need to be resilient moving forward. I would say for the future of education, that's really important. The World Economic Forum identifies, in terms of risk registries, the following in a short-term risk, which is things like misinformation, disinformation, geo-economic confrontations, polarizations, or populism that it's emerging. Extreme weather events, number 4. But when you push out a decade to this 2036, you see two really clear risks. Climate, so resilience around extreme weather, biodiversity loss, and changes to critical systems. And the second is artificial intelligence, both misinformation and disinformation, and adverse outcomes of AI technologies, right? So while we hear a lot about the future of education being AI and hyper-personalization in AI, I would challenge some of those outcomes. You'll see on 2 or 3 of these slides, I've got QR codes. And if you have a phone, or if you want to just screenshot it, this takes you to these studies that I'm referencing in part of this. The other thing that came out at the World Economic Forum that really caught my attention in terms of the future of education around this, climate resilience, is what the implications are for our particular disciplines in universities and the fields that we're, I think there's been a lot of our heads in the sand, but I was struck by 2 or 3 really significant global leaders who've talked about we're almost too late with climate. Now we just need to build resilience. The changes are already happening. There's nothing we can do to prevent it. So what does that look like for agriculture? What does that look like for the fields of study going forward? And that, for the future of education, kind of struck me. We've done some forecasting. I brought in MIT, Harvard researchers, and others, and we've looked at this, and we've really talked about what happens if sustainability goes critical. What does that mean for water? What does that mean for our communities? What does that mean for urbanization, and so on? So I would say that that's part of the context that we need to think about. With the work that we were doing through the Human Change Movement at the World Economic Forum, we were talking a lot about young people, children and youth. And so I want to just share with you those that you will inherit in your post-secondary very shortly. What we've seen in Alberta classrooms is the diversity and complexity of student needs has grown dramatically over the last 5 years. I do a random stratified sample of 5,000 teachers, urban, rural, highly representative of the population. And what we've seen is the social, emotional, behavioral, and cognitive complexities have grown exponentially in our schools and school communities. So we are seeing more and more complex students coming into post-secondary and leaving K-12. And this is across the board, well over a decade of using the same instrument. We see it. What we see in K-12 right now is lower empathy, more aggression, and increased fatigue and tiredness. So in terms of resilience, sleep quality and quantity has declined, and a lot of that's leading to mental health struggles. Much of it accelerated or amplified by social media or kind of screen time. The second is there's been a real decline in focus or the ability to focus, and that's really resulted in a reduced readiness to learn. Again, We see that across the K-12 system when we've got samples of about 1,000 at each grade level. And then weaker resilience overall, which is a big concern in terms of students' ability to bounce back from adversity, their ability to cope. I work with Dr. Thelma Gunn at the University of Lethbridge and some work on beginning teacher research, and she's built some excellent coping skills. And then the Prentice Institute has also been working with us on just what resilience looks like in the profession itself. So overall, in terms of the context, my big concern is what's happening with young people that are moving into the post-secondary system itself. And whether that's through social media and the structure of social media impact, to Jonathan Haidt's work on the anxious generation that has created a great deal of interest across our societies. What I'm concerned about is what is the purpose of education in an environment where more and more young people feel more and more isolated and increasingly lonely. So with that, I'm going to jump to what within a fourth industrial revolution is taking everybody's attention right now, which is AI. And when I look at the fourth industrial revolution and this moment of Janus-like change, the past and the future going through this threshold, there's 5 kind of dimensions of the fourth industrial revolution. There's the biotech, so there's the biomedical innovations, there's the Internet of Things, everything being connected to the internet, quantum computing, and robotics. But AI in particular has a really profound, or will have a profound effect on the future of education. Intelligence is cheap. We're in the middle of this intelligence explosion, for sure. However, I would still say that we're in the early stages of this revolution where people don't fully understand what the implications are, what is really being displaced and what's not, what occupations are exposed to AI, what are the implications for those occupations. The speed of that change is really profound. When I worked with Ray Kurzweil years ago when I was teaching a master's course at U of A, and his prediction was AI would reach human levels by around 2029, this law of accelerating returns, and by 2045, having multiplied our human biological intelligence a billion-fold. So the question becomes, what does education look like in a world where it's cheap, it's easily accessible, and it's woven into the fabric of your clothes? I would argue that in that environment, what we really need to be thinking about, and I'm just going to pull this up because for me, this is probably the most relevant, is the knowledge that we need to think about K-20 to develop these more resilient human beings who can flourish. And there's 3 categories in a world where AI is saturated and prevalent. One is social perception, the other is creativity, and the third is fine motor manipulation. These are bottlenecks to AI. So not just discipline specific, but within all of our disciplines, within all of our curriculum, what are the things that we need to nurture in the future of education over the next decade? Social perception, this is the ability to do that serve and return and really be conscious human beings that are living in real time. Mental health care workers, teachers, and nurses are jobs that have a very low probability, according to the Oxford Martin program, of being displaced by AI. We've seen a decline of free play in our young people. We see it in our schools in Alberta all the time right now. Since the late 1970s, we've lost 12 hours of work of free time. And what we're actually seeing are young people circulating around elementary schools looking at their devices. They're not actually in free play anymore. And with overscheduling, that is a huge implication on the type of students that are moving into post-secondary. 7 minutes of free play each week is what we're starting to see. Creativity as a bottleneck to AI for the future of education. Choreographers, makeup artists, art directors. Even though people talk about AI being incredibly creative, it's harvesting and scraping what's already out there. It's not a true creative space. So for me, I think any curriculum, any discipline needs to think about creativity, including coding. So as coding gets displaced, and we'll see a massive drop off as AI starts to code, what does creative coding look like? What are the human narratives that we can bring in that these AI systems won't have? And how do you nurture that creativity across the K-20 system for the future of education? And the third is something that I've learned from the Icelandic people and from the Finnish or from the Nordic countries when I've done lots of research projects back and forth with 10 high schools and rural and remote schools in Alberta with Finland and with Iceland. And that's fine motor manipulation because it takes billions of neurons to use this fine motor, oral surgeons, chiropractors, firefighters. And we are seeing young people coming in with very low fine motor skills into kindergarten and grade one. So we're thinking about how do we, in Iceland, for example, I was in one of the schools and everybody was knitting. We're starting to hear about people bringing back handwriting. And so those are other areas that are increasingly being looked at for the future of education. So in the last minute with this, hit you with a million things on a slide deck, I'm going to say that historically knowledge was power. Now it's going to be accessible everywhere. Clarity will be the new superpower, as you've all know, Harari talks about, which is what specifically are we going to focus in on? I think the professional wisdom of post-secondary teachers, instructors, and K-12 teachers is going to be incredibly important to start to filter out where human judgment needs to be placed in these, quantum computer AI defined education spaces. The question I ask around moral passivity is, to what extent will AI algorithms diminish our decision-making capabilities? How will, administrators start using big data to make predictive analytics that are not actually involving humans in the loop? The other big worry we have is cognitive stunting or cognitive atrophy, not having the critical thinking skills or the abilities going forward. That's the other thing that really in the next decade, we're going to have to keep a very clear eye on skills that are either lost or maybe were never developed. So these three bottlenecks that I just talked about. And with that, massive canter, I will just say that when I started with human or that learning is highly relational, those three bottlenecks are focused very much on the human condition and education and that serve and return that takes place between people. I think this idea of learning online, AI tutors, and hyper personalization is not going to be the future of learning. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Phil, for an excellent overview on the topic. We move now on to our next panelist. Karsten, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Phil, for the lovely overview, and thanks to the Prentice Institute for hosting this conversation. Great to be on a panel with Phil and Alex, and was trying to think a little bit, well, what can I contribute to that conversation, knowing of their work and being a follower of their work. So I want to focus in on one of the competencies or one of the pieces that I think we need to include as part of that, and that would be productive struggle. And so we'll work our way through that. So as I begin, just want to acknowledge I'm speaking to you today from Banff, where I'm participating in the National Summit on AI and Culture. And Banff and this area is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, nations of the Nakota, the Tsuut'ina, and the Métis. And this was also the gathering place and traveling route for many more Indigenous folk. And I think the act of acknowledging this land is an invitation to all of us, but also for myself to engage in very much the topic of my talk, which is productive struggle. Reconciliation is not an act of sort of passive banking of historical facts, but it's a relational process, as Phil was talking about, that requires us to sit with discomfort, to challenge our own biases, and to do the hard work of building a shared future. And for me, also, when we're talking about land and acknowledgement and artificial intelligence, also wanting to put in a plug, I guess, for our commitments to OCAP principles: ownership, control, access, possession, Indigenous data, Indigenous knowledge systems, and the ways in which those intersect or don't with AI systems, I think is something really, really crucial for us to be navigating in this moment, and hearing a lot of that at the summit that I'm participating in right now. So I come to this conversation with sort of three different intersecting perspectives or hats. I'm a professor of global and development studies, and so I am really passionate about how societies navigate change. And I think the AI moment and much more, as Phil has outlined, is absolutely a moment of change. I also am an adult educator, and so am really curious about how students or how adults learn. I think that's a really important piece. And I'm also a university administrator, and so I'm deeply involved in our collective ambition to be a leading AI-enabled university. So my talk today is largely not about AI. But want to be clear, it's not an anti-AI polemic. I think there is potential, and I think there's also a lot of risks that Phil has outlined for us already. But I think there is a lot of potential there as well. And so for me, some of the guiding folks I draw on are critical pedagogues like Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks, or environmental educators like Rachel Carson, or that I think learning requires us to be more critical and not less critical. And so this moment really provides us that opportunity. And for me, productive struggle, what I'm talking about is also messy. And so we're going to sort of map some of that out. So as we are racing towards whatever the future is the possible future, want to be sort of wary of a trap. One of my students in engineering recently I was chatting with him. He had wanted to give me some feedback about what we're doing with AI, and he talked about the seductive illusion of learning. And so AI can sort of mimic that learning moment. Student can do an assessment leaning heavily on AI, and they haven't actually learned whatever it is that we're trying to learn, content, but actually process as well. I really appreciated that phrasing of his illusion of learning. And so how important that is to human growth, sort of cognitive atrophy that Phil was talking about. So I want to tell you about another one of my students, and I've gotten her permission to share her story, and her name is Reeve. So she began her career in engineering, but that wasn't quite the right fit. So she found herself in what maybe at the moment might have seemed like an unproductive struggle, sort of the kind of friction that leads to burnout rather than growth. So she got what we sometimes call the dean's vacation, and so was asked to leave the university. And for many students, we know that's the end. Reeve, as we do for many of our students, we offered her the opportunity to pivot and join our Fresh Start program. And so that's then where sort of the struggle starts to become more productive. So that program sort of is an on-ramp back onto learning from your mistakes and thinking about what it means to be learning at a university setting. So she discovered a science, technology, and society program, and began to find the tools to bridge her interest in that technical sort of engineering background with her passion for social systems. So she started to sort of move from being sort of processed by the university to actually mapping it out, which is part of the narrative thread today. So to understand my students' Reeve's transition, we have to look at how we actually learn. And so I'm going to draw on educational psychologist Lev Vygotsky and the concept of zone of proximal development. And so that's that space between what I can already do right now and what I can do with some support. So I'm learning how to become a coach of my kids' soccer team. There's things I can do, but I really need to rely on the other folks, the other coaches who have more experience than me in coaching to actually get me there. That's sort of scaffolding me to that being a better coach of my soccer team. And obviously, we do this in writing assignments throughout the university when we ask students to go from the outline to the first draft. Maybe you have a lit review, depending on your field. Right, that's a way of scaffolding our students through that so that they can actually produce something better than if we just said, "Here's the assignment, go." So we're providing those supports along the way. And so one of the unique dangers in the AI area, and I think it's yeah, K through 20 is a great framing, is the danger of the cognitive offload. So when we use generative AI not as the scaffold to help us climb, but sort of the elevator that sort of helps us bypass the climb entirely. So most Gen AI systems right now have a study mode or a learning mode, or we have these learning tutors that we're, and I'm involved in this, but trying to roll out across our institutions. But as a researcher, as somebody who cares about how people learn, I have to ask, are these actually, these learning systems designed to support learning? Or is it just some sort of a crutch or something that replicates or it gives this illusion of learning rather than actually grounding it? Um, let us see here. Right, and so for my student, for Reeve, we want to be careful that we aren't that she didn't sort of shortcut the learning steps, that she didn't cognitively offload. There would have been a path, probably in the world of AI, to leaning in heavily with AI to help achieve. Some of that might have skirted the bounds of academic integrity, but instead she chose a different path. And so that's what I want to speak about. So mentioned Paulo Freire. One of the key pieces for him is sort of bringing together reading the word, becoming literate with reading the world, the context in which we're all living. So as AI learning assistants become more and more capable, other ed tech tools are developed that can support student learning. I fear that it may encourage actually us to abdicate our roles as educators in the learning experience. I think that's so crucial that we continue to stay involved. And Phil's pointing to data that would suggest that we're not going away, but what is it that we're doing, right? So if learning is in Freire's model, sort of the banking model of education, where students are this empty vessel that we're filling with knowledge, then you can see ways in which the educator may abdicate, right? Because AI is actually really good at that, if that's all we're trying to do. But Freire is calling for a liberatory model of education. And which would be, again, to pick up on one of Phil's key themes, a relational model, which is again also something that we hear over and over with Indigenous elders that we engage with as well. The importance of relationality, not just to each other as humans, but also to more than humans. So AI is a voracious reader of the word, right? It's ingested everything we've ever put out there, it seems, all the texts, all the videos, all the, maybe not all, but many. But generally, AI can't actually read the world in the ways in which it would be helpful in all instances, at least. It doesn't have lived experience. It doesn't have a sense of context, or only the context that we bring to it. And it doesn't have a sense of actually the social antagonisms that define our reality. So Reeve has come back, has found her new program, and I actually joined the conversation as supervisor of her capstone project in her program. So throughout her career, she's been working in the food industry in a variety of settings, bartender, server, etc. But she's also volunteered at the food bank. And in her own words, she says, quote, "I'm interested in the social organization of food on campus, specifically how the campus food bank must navigate institutional policies that often prioritize risk management over immediate human need of the hungry student." So she noticed, end quote, she noticed a paradox that food waste at the university is existing at the same time as we have significant food insecurity. And so she jumped into that and is doing a project to understand what the institutional barriers are to actually getting that food into the hands of our students. And through that, bringing her own lived experience as both a food service worker, as a student, as a food bank volunteer, that is a way in which she's bringing that critical reading of the world to her work. And also, as an educator, it puts me in potential conflict. I'm also a university administrator. What are the barriers she's going to identify? Are those going to land on my lap? And so that's also embracing that tension and the ambiguities of the moment. So a final educator whose work I want to draw on is Diane Marino, an arts-informed, community-based educator out of Toronto from quite a few years ago now, and her work, Wild Garden. So she reminds us that educators and leaders are generally several steps ahead of our students. We know where the detours are and we know where they go. We can see our students sort of wandering into the weed patch. And sometimes our instinct can be to nip it in the bud. But if we curtail that struggle, we can destroy the garden, right? The productive struggle is by definition a tension point and to a certain degree wild. And so we have to accept the discomfort of not knowing. We have to resist the urge to find ways of simply silencing the friction that might exist. So Reeve's journey required her educators, that's myself and many other colleagues, to allow the messiness of her second chance to flower into research. The ability to navigate messiness, to sit through the tensions and find a way through is not a liability. It is a core competency, and it is a core essence of being human. As we collectively build the future of education, we must embrace messiness of the productive struggle so that we can live in relationship with all humans and more than humans that we are all related to. So my sort of call to action is to not fear the messiness, defend the struggle, scaffold, don't offload, learn to read the world, and to tend the wild garden. Thank you.
That was a great presentation. Thank you, Karsten. And our last panelist is Alex. The floor is yours.
Thanks. That's two hard acts to follow. I worry I'm going to be a little bit boring here because I come at this from an institutional point of view, which is, inherently, I think, a little bit more boring than broader, sorts of questions. So I'm going to talk about money. I'm going to talk about the process of change, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think AI is going to play out both in the labor market and in higher education. So look, I was invited onto this panel to talk a little bit, what's in it for universities, what's going to happen to Alberta universities, something more geographically specific, which, and look, it's, you're about to get an enormous short-term sugar high from higher oil prices, but, the longer-term picture in Alberta is that you have a system a system of universities that was deliberately kept small for many years. And you're in the middle of one of the largest youth booms in Canadian history, right? So between 2020 and 2035, the population of 18-year-olds increases by about 40%. Most of the rest of the country, growth stops in the next couple of years. And in Alberta, it just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. And your government has sort of understood that this means they should build more high schools. And we've seen plans on that in the last couple of years where they say, hey, we should put this money in. It has not sunk into anything around universities. And I've been saying, I'm like, you have 40% increase in the number of 18-year-olds. Are you going to build another 12 universities and colleges? Or is every college and university going to grow by 40%? How many of you have plans to grow by 40%? And the answer is effectively nobody. I mean, U of A's got a little bit more room to grow than some others, but I mean, wow, like there are very big crunches coming. And it's coming at a time where, as I said, the provincial government doesn't seem that interested in funding it, where the means of self-funding were largely dependent on the arrival of international students, and the feds have put paid to that. So, and typically in these kinds of environments, universities get very inward looking, because it's about what do you have to cut? What has to go? What can we do less of? which are not fun conversations to have, and everybody tries to avoid them and pass the buck to other people. So, and people start fighting each other because it's that saying, the animals around the watering hole look a little differently at each other during a drought, and that's kind of where you are right now as a post-secondary sector. Yeah, and it's coming at a time where there is actually quite a bit of change going on. And we could use not just that, the number of students is going up and institutions could use more money. I think there's genuine technological and social change that's going on that quite apart from any money that's available that people should be focusing on and sort of saying, well, how should we change our institutions and change our curriculum and pedagogy to deal with these kinds of things? And I think it's going to be very difficult for institutions to focus on that in the next couple, 3 years. Like I said, man, maybe the sugar high of maybe the Straits of Hormuz stay closed for years and the sugar high, turns into something more permanent. And, who knows? Who knows? Maybe things are different, but I don't think that's the likeliest scenario. So that's the first thing to remember is that universities are distracted from the basic task at hand. The second thing I want to talk about is the process of change. And, it's not public. So I think there's two issues at play here, which is number one, whatever the short term tells you, and they, student numbers are going up globally. The number of young people in the world, so 18 to 21, youth population in the world, stops growing in 2033. It's going to hit an all-time high in 2033. And there are countries where it's going to still grow up, but they're mainly pretty poor. And there are countries where it's going down rapidly, including China, including India, including Brazil. Some of the biggest countries in the world are already into their decline phase. Canada is odd because it sort of bounces along, retains its student population better than most. But that's going to create an issue across all of academia, across all of education. Like higher education has been built for 80 years on the notion that there's always going to be more people out there in the future, and there's just not anymore. And eventually that'll catch up to Alberta, sort of 10, 15 years from now, but it'll be there. And so for higher education to remain relevant, given the world population keeps growing until the mid 2070s, it probably has got to start looking for new markets. It needs to start looking for older students. And we're seeing that in places like Italy and Brazil. I mean, online education has become a much bigger part of the mix there, and they're sustaining growing enrollment rates despite an aging population because they can go after an older market. And so I think we're going to have to think about that. And it's not just universities need to think about it. Employers need to think about it, right? Like employers, Canadian employers are really bad at investing in education. But if they want to be competitive, they have to start. We have to really start thinking about how both universities and colleges on the one hand and employers on the other can work together to create a more skilled workforce. Now, lifelong learning has been the wave of the future for well over 40 years now. Still never seems to get there, but eventually we're going to have to hit that point together. Otherwise, I think it's in many ways the country is in trouble, not just institutions. The other thing I would note is that we've had a big fall in public confidence over it, not just institutions, not just governments having a decline in confidence in institutions, but I think the public has as well. And it's largely centered around, I would argue, fear of technological change. That parents are not convinced that universities and colleges are future-proofing their kids enough. And we've been through this moment before, okay? Like if you go back to the 1990s, one of the amazing things about Canada was, we would have, like Maclean's would have at least 2 cover articles a year about education. And I'm not talking about their rankings. This is like, are our kids learning? We cared about that stuff 20, 30 years ago. And for some reason, we don't anymore. But we blame colleges and universities for poor outcomes anyway, or uncertain outcomes. So I think there's got to be a lot more work thinking about how institutions, this is just about regaining public confidence, is being able to demonstrate much more clearly how institutions are changing their curriculum, and I mean curriculum right across the board, in order to help students deal with technological change. I just don't think there's much. I don't think there's a lot of confidence there, and I think the institutions need to do more. If I knew more about this, I'd be a much better paid consultant. So I don't have any quick answers to give you about this one, but I do think it's important to engage with. Now, AI is part of that discussion, right? Because AI is a big part of technological change. And one thing that I have noticed, particularly in the last, I don't know, 6 weeks or so, it's become really, really evident to me that world higher education is dividing in two, that there's a real geopolitics of higher education when it comes to AI. That Asia and Africa are essentially ignoring almost everything that Karsten said, right? Like for AI in Asia and Africa, which are very STEM focused, where institutions are very STEM focused, okay, much more so than in Europe and the Americas. They see AI as a leapfrog technology. They want to go all in on it. And so you get, Ethiopia and India both opened or announced the opening of new AI universities, like whole universities that do nothing but AI. Last month, Pakistan decided they were going to make it mandatory. You cannot graduate from university in Pakistan if you do not take a 3-credit course in artificial intelligence. I mean, I could go on, and this is just like Kazakhstan did something similar. They announced something similar last summer. The number of center of excellences in places like Iraq and Turkey on AI, like it's just huge. And we don't think of it that way. Like it's not just that we're not creating new AI institutions, right? I mean, it's, we're creating lots of AI programs, possibly too many, if you ask me. But the focus in the West is very much on preventing harms of AI. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But it's a very defensive posture. And I don't think it's difficult. It's, like I say, where STEM is culturally in control of universities, it's all speed ahead on AI. Where control of universities is culturally, I mean, most university presidents in North America, in Europe, they're from the social sciences and humanities, okay? So even though STEM gets lots of money and everybody in social sciences and humanity complains about how much money STEM gets, culturally, in our country, universities are run by social sciences and humanities. And I will just say there are 2 Netflix series right now on English departments alone, plus another one on AMC. Like just in the last 5 years, we've made 18 hours of prestige television about English departments. Nobody does this in biology. I think this is important. This actually changes the way we think about these kinds of things. Anyway, and so institutions do need to get beyond the defensive crouch around AI. They have to become more activist. And I think we have a lot of lessons that we actually know. We just don't take them, because I'm not as convinced as Philip is that AI is quite as novel a technology or as unique a technology as you think. I mean, I think it certainly accentuates things that we've seen, trends in the economy that we've seen for the last 40 years or so. But look, when the microcomputer came along, that changed pedagogy enormously in many fields, right? I mean, just even having like a Texas Instruments calculator, like engineers were freaking out that it would erode students' ability to use a slide rule. And, people would get upset, but we figured it out. We figured out the actual slide rule doesn't matter. It's the concepts that matter. Here's how you use this technology to teach these concepts in a different way. Same thing when the internet was developed. Students' relationship to texts, and the way that they obtain information or gather information changed enormously with the invention of search. And did we actually, and so in the social sciences and humanities, frankly, I don't think that writing, I mean, that's what everyone freaks out about with AI, is that writing is being usurped by AI. I don't think we've been teaching what we think we're teaching around, in essays since search came along. Like, I think there was a lot that we just didn't acknowledge it. And we didn't acknowledge it, and we let every professor figure this stuff out for themselves. Right? And so it took forever for us to really update our processes. Just imagine, what if we actually had institutions that could say this is the way we can't ignore AI the way we ignored search, the way we ignored microcomputers, because it's coming so fast. Like technological adoption of AI is very quick. What if we actually said, this is the way we're going to have a faculty-led process for dealing with AI, for incorporating AI into teaching. We're going to help faculty develop these skills. We're going to help them develop tools that let them exploit AI. There are institutions around the world that are doing various bits of that. I'm pretty impressed by. I'm not impressed by very much in the state of Florida, but Florida State University has done some fantastic stuff, I think, around faculty-led adoption of AI. And I think that we just need to remember what life was like 40 years ago and actually learn what those lessons were pedagogically, because we did learn them individually, haphazardly. We can do it collectively. And I think that would just make a much more interesting system. Are we going to do it? Right? I mean, this is partly, this is a question where we're talking about futures. I'm hoping that we're smart enough to take a future where we can do that. I do worry that for various reasons, people will get, people are a little bit sniffy about AI technology for various reasons, and they'll refuse to do this on, I don't know, some kind of moral ground. I'm not really sure what it would be, but so I'm worried that there will be resistance to AI that actually prevents us from doing the right thing here and actually opening up the potential and understanding what kinds of skills people are using. I mean, this is, we don't even have a good sense right now about what skills AI, what tasks AI is replacing in the economy, and therefore what skills actually need to be taught outside of the people who are actually learning to code AI, right? So we talk about AI in terms of let's have more AI programs, but the more important thing is to think about how AI is going to change life in the other 95% of the economy, and work backwards from there about what to teach and how to teach it. So I hope we learn these lessons. I'm not sure I would bet on it, but I hope we learn these lessons. We're capable of doing it, certainly. And I think that discussion is going to be one of the most important ones in higher education anywhere for the next 5-10 years. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Alex, for a great presentation. And Phil and Karsten, once again, thank you. You have all raised fundamental issues and existential questions for us. And now we have time for questions from the audience. So please post your questions to the chat for me to relay to the panelists. If you want to give us a bit of information about the perspective you're asking your questions from, whether as faculty, administrator, student, general public, or other, that is welcome for context, but by no means mandatory. Also, please indicate if you want your question to be directed to one of the three panelists in particular, or if you're happy for any of them to answer. So I guess I see, okay. So again, instead of raising your hand, please post your questions in the chat. And we may just have a minute of delay while people type, perhaps.
Andrea, while they're typing or while you're pulling questions, I just wanted to, because I think I first of all appreciate Alex and Karsten's perspectives, but one of the things, Alex, I initially was like you around, is this just another technology accelerating or amplifying? What changed for me when I started to work with the frontier model engineers, the people who were designing this, the Richard Suttons of Alberta, and the people who are kind of on the inside of these neural networks, these trillion set neural networks, because they're hacking human language and communication. For me, what I initially thought is this will just be a, souped up Word document, but they're starting to show reasoning the AI systems are starting to show reasoning in a way that even the engineers don't fully understand. And that for me is the game changer around all of this. Because once they become recursive, self-improving systems and start doing some more projection out and reasoning, then that impacts any intellectual or complex human work that we prepare. So for me, that's the question of trajectory, right? From kind of artificial narrow intelligence to artificial general intelligence and what the implications are. So I am more cautious about the warnings of the Joshua Bengios, of the Jeffrey Hintons, of the different people who are really in this space right now around these are not our traditional microchip accelerating the work that we did, or this is reasoning and hacking human language in ways that could fundamentally shift society. I mean, that's just one of those counterpoints.
Yeah, whereas I'm pretty fundamentally in Gary Marcus's camp on this one. I just don't think that in the absence of a way of interacting with the world, that this reasoning makes any amount of difference or can be deployed in ways that make anybody any money. Like, not to be too crass about it. And yeah, I mean, I hear those people. I hear the people you're listening to too. But I mean, I also remember when Jeff Hinton thought that it was criminal 15 years ago. He was out there saying it was criminal to keep training radiologists because this would be totally unnecessary by 2016. And we're still there. We still have radiologist shortages. It's just anyway. So I mean, I recognize the perspective you're coming from. I'm skeptical. So.
Cautiously, yeah, which is good. Yeah.
Thank you both. The questions are beginning to accumulate in the chat, so maybe I will start with that now. Thank you for offering this session and for the great presentations. This is a question for Dr. Phil McRae. As of December 10, 2025, Australia has implemented a world-first ban prohibiting children under 16 from accessing major social media platforms to protect their mental health. The law requires platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Snapchat to deactivate accounts for this group or face fines up to 49.5 million. France could become the second country to ban social media for the young. The question is, to reduce social isolation and loneliness in a probable, possible, or preferred future, do you think Alberta or Canada can follow Australia's example?
Thank you. First of all, the movement around social media bans or cell phone bans in schools, I wrote the ban that ended up becoming legislation in Alberta around cell phones. And then we followed up with a research set of studies on the impact of it, and still are. Primarily because for the last 15 years, I've been working with Harvard Medical School on what are the implications for young people of extended screen time in all their manifest forms, whether it's social media and so on. I think these bans are very difficult to enforce, quite honestly. Like the idea is to try and create some space in a K-12 student's life where they are not fully embedded in 8 hours of screen time, whether it's video gaming, Snapchat, whatever the platform. Do I think here's my read on it right now as things are changing. Social media incentivizes attention. It's basically, I want to hold your attention, and the algorithm is hyper-personalizing all the time. That's the monetization. That's the motivation. What we're moving into is a world where we're starting to see anthropomorphic AI emerge very quickly, faster than I could imagine. We've just put 3 policy resolutions forward on these new systems that in voice and likeness are so human-like that they're incentivizing attention. They're incentivizing affection. They want to be your friend, right? And if I have access to some beta anthropomorphic AI that will come out in about 6 months, and it is stunning how human-like. I mean, the Turing model these are fully human-like in conversation and in voice and likeness. Now they're not roboticized in the world as Alex was talking about, and in real world time. But I think that we need to put boundaries in a digitally boundless space. And I don't care whether that's social media, whether that's phones, or whether that's AI. And I would say that that needs to be ratcheted up developmentally. So, yeah, under the age of 16, give young people a chance to develop with and without technology. This is an anti-STEM in any way, but we are seeing the rise of anxiety and depression because of the spaces that they inhabit for an extended period of time. And we need to find a better balance. Talking about China, China's put in bans. Yes, Australia has. Yes, France has. Um, but, nocturnal screen time, young people developing their brains shouldn't be on screens late into the evening, right? Impacting their sleep quality and quantity and other things. So I guess the simple answer to this is we need to think about boundaries for young minds, and young developing children and youth. I would say yes, up to the age of 16. Enforcing those kinds of bans are difficult. However, in Alberta, we put those forward and it's worked. You will not see the unwinding of the cell phone ban in Alberta schools. Once that was written, and it was written in a way that said you may use cell phones if it's pedagogically viable. If you're out doing, let's say, a field trip and you're in Bio 20 and you want to use a phone to take photos or, calculate, pH or do other things, yes, go for it. But this is not a free for all. We need some boundaries and boundless era. That was a long answer, but yeah, I think they can work if we do them mindfully.
That's great. Thank you, Phil. There is another question, prefaced by thanks for these excellent presentations. Dr. McRae mentioned at the start a risk of diminished equity. Could he elaborate?
Well, we'll soon have 6 trillionaires in the world, right? I mean, 6 or 7 people own 50% of the wealth on the planet, and it's growing. So inequities are massive. Alex and Karsten alluded to this, but in Alberta, the idea about, I mean, it would be great if we could actually see the high schools they've committed to building actually built. But the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. The Matthew effect globally is a challenge. And, the idea of public education, whether it's public post-secondary or public K-12 schools, is that we lift the tide of an entire society, that we actually build those skills and those literacies, and those competencies that build a society. However, the concentration of wealth is getting to the stage where last November, was it last November? Maybe it was a year and a half ago, November. We did a public lecture with Margaret Atwood in Calgary on public education and the common good. And one of the things that she alluded to, which I thought was very prescient, as she is with her work on the Handmaid's Tale, is that if you get inequities continuing on the trajectory that we see, you will see a response like the French Revolution. The systems that we have break down. You cannot concentrate the wealth to 6 trillionaires. And with AI and AI companies and the growth and the valuations, and this is where we are going. And so, I think inequities, access. I'm a ranch kid from Pincher Creek. I did not come from a family of great wealth. I went to the University of Lethbridge for my undergrad, ended up doing my PhD at U of A and lecture at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Not because I came from wealth and privilege to filter me out into these spaces, but because I was able to show the ability to move in to learn in these spaces. We have to create equitable education systems, K-20, in Canada, because that's been a foundation of our prosperity and our success for quite a long time.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil.
And
Um,
Andrew, if I could, I'd be interested in Karsten and Alex's perspective on that, because the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, the stratification of society has huge implications on who can afford to go to public universities. But I'd be interested in their perspectives because I think their wisdom is far greater than mine on this.
Sure, I can go, Alex. I'm sure you also have things to contribute. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you've got your finger on it, and in the space of AI, one of my concerns is who is making all the decisions related to this. So some of the trillionaires that you're speaking about are in fact the ones that are monetizing. To the extent that I take your point, Alex, are they going to be able to fully? Um, but are monetizing this AI moment. And so I think it is even, yeah, the actual AI itself is part of the thing that's sort of even further creating these inequities. And then, yeah, what happens? Who can go? I'm not worried about my kids. They're coming from a privileged background, right? So what about the other kids who don't have those same advantages that mine do? And are we creating the spaces for that to happen? I think that's a crucial piece of what we need to do. And again, it's messy, right? So it takes people off the path. It is not the linear system. The algorithm, okay, we could probably draw the algorithm, but it doesn't actually fit that way. And so, how do we make sure that as we reimagine our systems, we're building in resilience, building in off ramps or roundabouts or whatever the right metaphor is for for learning to happen, for people to be able to graduate and occupy the world, make contributions to the world that they are inheriting.
I'm not sure how comfortable I am making any predictions here. I just point out that the Gilded Age looked pretty solid in the 1920s. It didn't look like anything was going to disrupt it. Um, I think people will. I forget who the economist is. If something can't go on forever, it won't. And I just don't think that the level of concentration and exploitation that we're seeing particularly out of Silicon Valley, is I just don't think it's sustainable. So I think it will change at some point. I think the one thing I can say fairly confidently is um, no one's going to get rich off AI. Not AI companies. There's an awful lot of AI investors. There's an awful lot of the AI companies that are out there right now that are not going to survive the shakeout. Like this is actually just, I mean, this is another issue, but for institutions, this actually creates a real significant problem. Um, when ChatGPT goes bust, and it will, because I mean, just its share price is so out of line with any credible um, thought about how much income it's ever going to get. Um, what happens to its products? What happens to the data? Like if you're a university, because they're after universities, like they know that they're running out of money, and institutions are really. It's easier to sell something to an institution from their perspective than it is to go and get somebody to pay $20 a month for whatever service they have, right? Like I said, that's a lot of work to get those. So big institutional clients are very valuable, and they're offering all sorts of stuff, some of which is vaporware, to institutions. And what are the odds that the company that your institution ends up working with is still around in 5 years? I don't know. And what happens to the data, personal data in many cases, that they will be using? And so there's a lot of questions, I think, about, and I'm not saying this to say that AI isn't a really interesting technology, right? Like the fact that the people who are running many of these companies are creeps is neither here nor there. The point is, this is really interesting stuff, and it will. You have to distinguish between the technology and the technology companies. But what happens to the technology companies is very, very uncertain right now, which I think makes it difficult for institutions to plan, frankly. So
Really interesting discussion. Thank you to the three of you. I will continue with the next question. Three awesome presentations from each of your perspectives. What do you see as the biggest AI literacy gap among researchers? How do you think we should better utilize these new technologies for research activities, ideally in ethical ways? I am hesitant to use AI tools, but realize their potential for benefit.
Can I just
What are
take a
your
start at
thoughts?
this? Let me take this.
Absolutely. Go
So
ahead.
AI is going to be used in very different ways in different fields. I mean, that's the first thing. So I'm not sure that there's an easy answer to this question because the way AI is being used in data heavy um, uh, disciplines is quite different from the way it's being used in creative disciplines. Or so-called creative disciplines. I'm not, anyway. But and so I think there's really interesting. I mean, I tend to be. I think of myself either as a historian or a political scientist because that's what my two degrees are in, and I use AI in particular ways, um, that make sense in those disciplines. And I know where I'm lacking, and I have a rough idea of where I'm lacking in literacy. Um, but I wouldn't have the faintest idea how to say that to how to have that discussion with someone in biology. So I think it's a um, yeah, it's a tricky question to answer.
If I could jump in, so I do a variety of things, but one is coordinate a series of committees at the University of Alberta, and one of those subcommittees that sort of feed in is a one on research. And so I think one of the challenges is actually what do we mean by AI at all? I mean, I think Alex is there, right? So I recently was at a committee and we had some economists presenting, and the words AI didn't it weren't anywhere in their proposal. And so I asked the question, like, when are you going to talk about the AI work that you folks have been doing for decades, right? All of the economic modeling is a form of AI. It's machine learning, right? And similarly in libraries, right? Our ability to do search from I'm still old enough that started with the card catalog, right? The kinds of things we can do in a library setting, in a research setting, has been built on a foundation of AI, a different form of AI, not generative AI, for a really long time. And so I think actually even understanding what we're talking about when we're talking about AI, and then what are the opportunities, what are the potentials, what are the risks? Because as Alex is saying, yeah, it really depends on if you're doing computational biology, it's going to be very different than if you are a performing artist. And so yeah, and then we cover the gamut. Yeah, so I think that is one of the pieces. I think another gap is sort of a sophisticated understanding of the social and environmental impacts of these technologies. And so sometimes we use the headline as a way of saying, well, I'm too scared, and so I'm not going to engage. And I think that's also um, has the potential for some risk there because these technologies are there. And so understanding them as we understand the social and environmental impacts of them. I think we need to hold that tension together because there's different ways, again, depending on what AI you're talking about, even within the Gen AI space, different ways of putting in data, of processing the data. So working with Indigenous communities that have totally on-prem, on their laptop AI for language revitalization. That's a very different thing, and not sort of subject to some of these concerns one has about sharing the data with the big tech companies, right? So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think the caution of, this is like, what lens do you want to take this on? Because there's just so much that you could focus on. I'll tell you as a researcher how I see the future of this because I play with these models. And to your point, Karsten, about the environment, one of the most interesting things in Davos was at a dinner with Imperial College of London, hearing about space-based data centers and what the we're not moving into the water implications anymore, and just there's a whole different level of development that's happening that we don't even know about either. I mean, these aren't just hypothetical. SpaceX is already, building and planning and looking at launching these space data centers, this is going to shift again, I think. So to Alex's point about, what are the implications? What we have now won't necessarily be 5 years from now. What I would say and how I use this is so I have data sets that are anonymized that don't have the issues of correlation that we want to have. And I use agentic AI as a model to run through multi-step analysis, statistically significant analysis of large data sets and pattern recognition, which is what AI is good for, that I have historically paid 25 grand for to just get a tenth of what I'm getting back now. So it is giving me reach and insight that at a scale of cost is like beyond what I could have imagined. What I would say going forward in the future is that you still have to do the hard work of the research. You still have to know what coding qualitative data looks like. You still have to understand statistical significance and chi-square, and you still have to understand the meaning behind the research before you apply these tools. What I'm most worried about with the cognitive atrophy and stunting is that I want, people just take the shortcut. And I see this even as somebody who sits on PhD committees. It's like you didn't actually read Paulo Freire's work on pedagogy of distancing. You didn't actually read his work on literacy in Brazil and what that actually looked like. Because when you read deeply and you understand it and you've spent the time with it, you do have a deeper sense. And then you can read the hype from the reality. I'm worried about that with research. However, if you have some of those skill sets, the amplifying quality of some of these tools is off the charts. There are things that we can do now in the Alberta Teachers Association with research that are providing foresight and insight that I guarantee you the government probably won't even think about for the next 3 to 5 years. And so, yes, that is giving us advantages, and it will for universities. But what I worry about most is doing the hard work before you apply the tools, because I see a lot of people using it, and that's the moral passivity challenge, which is they don't understand the moral implications of, oh, well, AI says we should do it, let's do it. Whoa, 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 whoa. You can red team and you can use AI to help you think through things, but use your human wisdom and judgment that you've gained instead of just relying on these systems. So yeah, it's a complex space.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have about a couple more questions, but we are also over time at this point, and I'm assuming all of you, if not some of you, have other obligations to attend to. So I think that we will probably have to limit the questions at this point. But thank you very much once again, Phil, Karsten, and Alex, for this very informative and engaging session. You have given us a lot to think about, and we're left with both, I guess, a mix of optimism and trepidation, but hopefully, above all, motivated to think creatively about this crucial opportunity that we have to reformulate and reshape the future of education. Thank you as well to the audience for joining us today. Thanks very much.